The rain began the moment Marcus Chen pulled his car through the iron gates of Blackwood Academy. Not a gradual drizzle, but an immediate downpour, as though the sky had been waiting for his arrival to split open through the cascading water on his windshield. The building loomed, a Gothic monstrosity of gray stone and pointed spires that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the afternoon light. Marcus killed the engine and sat there, listening to percussion of rain on metal. The photograph in the brochure hadn't done the place justice. Or perhaps it had done it too much justice, somehow making it seem welcoming, prestigious even. In person, Blackwood Academy looked less like a school and more like a wound in the landscape, something that festered there for so long it had become part of the earth itself. But he needed this job, after the incident at his previous school, the one that had nothing to do with him, yet somehow everything to do with his career's sudden nosedive. Marcus needed this fresh start. The position had appeared like a lifeline. English literature teacher, competitive salary, housing included. The fact that he'd never heard of Blackwood Academy despite his 15 years in education seemed, at the time, like a minor detail. He grabbed his briefcase and made the sprint to the main entrance, his shoes splashing through puddles that seemed too deep for the short time it had been raining. The heavy oak door swung open before he could reach for the handle, and a woman stood silhouetted against the dim interior light. "Mr. Chen," she said, not a question but a statement. "You're punctual. I appreciate that." Headmistress Victoria Blackwood was tall, impossibly thin, with silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. Her eyes were a pale blue that reminded Marcus of ice over deep water. "Thank you for having me," Marcus replied, stepping inside and immediately feeling the temperature drop. The interior was colder than the rain outside. "The weather here can be quite dramatic," Victoria said, closing the doors with sound like a coffin ceiling. "You'll grow accustomed to it. We all do eventually." She led him through corridors that twisted in ways that seemed architecturally improbable. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced men and women in academic regalia, their eyes seeming to track Marcus as he passed. Students moved through the halls in complete silence, their uniforms black blazers, white shirts, black ties, giving the appearance of an army of shadows. "We maintain strict discipline here," Victoria explained, her heels clicking against the stone floor. "Our students understand the value of silence, of contemplation. You'll find them remarkably well-behaved." One student passed close enough for Marcus to see her face. She couldn't have been more than 16, but her eyes held something ancient and tired. When she noticed Marcus looking, she smiled, and he felt his stomach turn. There was something wrong with that smile, though he couldn't immediately identify what. "Here is your classroom," Victoria announced, stopping before a door marked 237. "You'll teach 4 classes daily. The curriculum is quite specific. You'll find all necessary materials in your desk." The classroom was long and narrow, with high windows that let in precious little light despite the afternoon hour. Rows of antique wooden desks faced a blackboard that still bore the faint ghost of previous writings. Marcus approached it, squinting to make out the words. "The hollowing must feed." "Excuse me," Marcus said, turning to ask Victoria about the strange message, but she was already gone. The door stood open to an empty hallway. He spent the next hour exploring the room, finding the promised curriculum materials in his desk drawer. The texts were unlike any he'd seen in modern education. Dense, archaic books on subjects that seemed only tangentially related to literature. The grammar of suffering, syntax and the sublimation of self, poetry of the void. When he opened one at random, the pages were filled with language exercises that made his eyes hurt to read. The sentences seemed to writhe on the page, their meanings shifting whenever he tried to focus on them. The bell rang. Not the electronic chime he was used to, but an actual bell, deep and resonant, that seemed to vibrate in his bones. Students filed in silently, taking their seats with mechanical precision. 23 of them, their faces uniformly blank. "Good afternoon," Marcus began, his voice sounding too loud in the strange acoustics of the room. "I'm Mr. Chen, your new English teacher." No response. 23 pairs of eyes stared at him with that same unsettling quality he'd noticed in the girl in the hallway. "Let's start with introductions," he tried again. "Why don't we go around the room, and you can each tell me your name and something you enjoy reading?" A boy in the front row raised his hand slowly, mechanically. "We don't introduce ourselves here, Mr. Chen. We are not individuals. We are students of Blackwood Academy. We are becoming." "Becoming what?" Marcus asked before he could stop himself. The boy's smile was the same wrong smile as before. Empty. The lesson proceeded in surreal fashion. Marcus attempted to discuss basic literary concepts, but the students responded in a chorus of monotone voices, completing each other's sentences in perfect synchronization. They quoted passages from the strange text on his desk as though they were scripture, speaking in unified rhythm that sounded like chanting. When the bell finally rang, they filed out in the same eerie silence they'd entered with, leaving Marcus alone in the classroom with a growing sense of dread coiling in his gut. The pattern repeated through his remaining 3 classes. Different students, identical behavior. By the time the final bell rang and he was free to find his assigned quarters, Marcus's hands were shaking. His apartment was located in the east wing of the school, a small suite of rooms that smelled of dust and something else, something organic and rotten beneath the must. The windows looked out onto the school's courtyard, where he could see students standing in the rain, unmoving, their faces turned upward to the downpour. He called them in for dinner, but no one came. The students simply stood there, letting the rain wash over them, for hours. That night, Marcus dreamed of hallways that stretched into infinity, of classrooms where students sat at desks that melted into the floor, of a vast darkness beneath the school that breathed with patient hunger. He woke at 3:37 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside his door, not walking, but dragging, as though something heavy was being pulled across the floor. He didn't open the door to look. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of wrongness. Marcus tried to teach, tried to connect with the students, but every attempt met with the same hollow responses. He began to notice other things. The way certain students appeared in multiple classes, despite the schedule making that impossible. The way the portraits in the hallways changed positions when he wasn't looking directly at them. The way the building's architecture seemed to shift, corridors appearing where none had been before, familiar rooms becoming impossible to find. Other teachers existed. He saw them in the faculty lounge, hunched over lukewarm coffee with thousand-yard stares, but they never spoke to him. When he tried to start conversations, they would simply stand and leave, moving with the same mechanical precision as the students. The only person who seemed willing to talk was Victoria, though her conversations were circular and strange, filled with references to the Academy's purpose and the Great Transformation, without ever explaining what those things meant. "The students are preparing," she told him during one of their brief encounters. "As are you, whether you realize it or not." Preparing for what? Her smile was gentle and terrifying. For hollowing Mr. Chen, for becoming vessels. This school has stood for 200 years, and in that time, it has perfected a very particular kind of education. He should have left then. Should have packed his things and driven away and never looked back. But something kept him there, not physical restraint, but something more subtle and insidious. He would make plans to leave, would even pack his suitcase, but then he would find himself in a classroom again with no memory of unpacking. As though time itself had skipped, the students began to change more obviously. Their movements grew more synchronized. Their voices, when they spoke in class, became increasingly harmonized until Marcus could no longer distinguish individual speakers. They moved as one organism, thought as one mind. And they were hungry. He noticed at first in the way they looked at him, not with the blank stares of before, but with an intensity that suggested appetite. During lessons, they would lean forward in their desks, mouths slightly open, as though trying to consume his words, his thoughts, his very essence. The texts he was required to teach grew darker, the exercises more invasive. He found himself assigning passages that made students bleed from their noses when they read them aloud, poetry that caused seizures, grammar drills that left pupils catatonic for hours. And he couldn't stop. His mouth moved, his hands wrote on the blackboard, but Marcus Chen was becoming a passenger in his own body. One evening, he found himself in a part of the school he'd never seen before, a descending staircase behind an unmarked door that had definitely not been there before. He should have turned back, should have run, but his legs carried him down into the depths beneath Blackwood Academy. The stairs ended in a massive chamber carved from living rock. The walls were lined with alcoves, and in each alcove sat a figure. Former teachers, former students. He couldn't tell which. They were desiccated, hollow, their mouths open in silent screams, their bodies twisted into positions that suggested they'd try to claw their way out of their own skin. In the center of the chamber squatted something vast and ancient. It had no definite form. Sometimes it appeared as a massive brain, pulsing with dark veins, sometimes as a collection of mouths and eyes, sometimes as nothing more than a void in space that hurt to perceive. But Marcus understood, with the clarity of absolute terror, what he was looking at. The hollowing, the thing beneath the school, the thing the school had been built to feed. It fed on minds, on consciousness, on the very essence of self. The students weren't being educated. They were being emptied, turned into vessels for this entity to fill with its alien thoughts. And the teachers were the harvesters, unwittingly preparing each crop of students for consumption. Victoria Blackwood stood beside the thing, her form shifting and unstable, as though she was only partially present in reality. "Welcome, Mr. Chen," she said, her voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. "You're progressing nicely. Soon, you'll be ready to join our permanent faculty. Soon, you'll understand the beauty of emptiness, of surrender." Marcus tried to scream, tried to run, but he was frozen in place. The hollowing reached out with appendages that existed in too many dimensions, touching his mind with fingers made of absence. He felt himself beginning to hollow out, his memories draining away, his personality dissolving like sugar in water. But something resisted. Some core part of Marcus Chen that had survived 15 years of a thankless profession, that had endured bureaucracy and politics and the slow grinding down of idealism. That part would not let go. He thought of why he'd become a teacher in the first place. Not to empty minds, but to fill them. Not to destroy identity, but to help young people discover who they were. The thought was small, but it was solid, and it was his. Marcus wrenched himself backward, breaking whatever psychic hold the entity had on him. He stumbled, fell, scrambled back toward the stairs. Behind him, the hollowing shrieked, a sound like all the world's air being sucked into vacuum, and Victoria's form began to stabilize, her face contorting with rage. "You cannot leave," she shouted. "No one leaves Blackwood Academy. We are forever. We are eternal." But Marcus was already running, taking the stairs 3 at a time, his lungs burning, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. The corridors above twisted and writhed, trying to confuse him, to turn him around. But he followed the one thing he knew was real, the sound of rain. It had never stopped raining since he arrived. He burst through the front doors and into the downpour, sprinting for his car. Behind him, he could hear the school groaning, its very foundations shifting. Students were emerging from every entrance, moving toward him in perfect synchronization, their mouths open, revealing throats that went down into impossible darkness. Marcus's hands shook so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, and died. The students were halfway across the courtyard. Come on, come on, come on," he whispered, turning the key again. The engine roared to life. He threw the car into reverse, spinning out of the parking space, then shifted the drive and floor of the accelerator. The car fishtailed on the wet gravel, found traction, and surged forward. In his rear-view mirror, he saw the students stop at the gate, standing in a perfect line, watching him go with their hollow eyes. And behind them, the school itself seemed to ripple and fade, as though it was only partially anchored to reality. Marcus drove through the night, putting miles between himself and Blackwood Academy, not stopping until rain finally ceased and dawn broke over a highway he recognized. He pulled into a rest stop and sat there, shaking, as the morning light slowly convinced him that he'd escaped. He tried to report it, of course, went to the police, to the State Education Board, to anyone who would listen, but there was no record of Blackwood Academy. No such address existed. The phone number he'd called for his interview was disconnected. The emails had vanished from his account. It was as though the entire place had never existed. But Marcus knew better. He knew it was out there somewhere, in some fold of reality where desperate people could find it when they needed a second chance badly enough. Still feeding, still hollowing. He never taught again. Couldn't bring himself to stand in front of a classroom. Couldn't shake the feeling that if he did, he might start teaching the wrong lessons, might start emptying rather than filling. Sometimes on rainy days, he still gets emails offering teaching positions at schools he's never heard of. He deletes them immediately without reading past the subject line. But late at night, when sleep won't come, he wonders about the students he left behind, wonders if any part of them still exists, trapped in those hollow shells, wonders if someday the thing beneath will grow hungry enough to reach beyond its gates. And he wonders, most of all, about the piece of himself he felt drain away before he broke free, the part of him that the hollowing consumed. Some nights, he can feel it missing, a hollow space in his mind where something used to be. On those nights, the rain begins again, pattering against his window, like fingers tapping, 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 waiting for him to return.